Let's do some SAT reading and writing. Okay, this is SAT Digital Practice Test 1. My name is Vince Kotchian. Let's get straight into it. Just going to go through the reading and writing section for you here. So let's start with number 1. These are word in context questions. So we just have to use logic to figure it out. Former astronaut Ellen says that she doesn't have a definite idea of when it might happen. She blanked that humans will someday need to be able to live in environments other than Earth. This conjecture, that means this sort of guess. And the right answer is going to be B, speculates, because that goes with conjecture. All right, let's move on to number 2 here. In the 50s, Annie continuously worked to promote public health. So the semicolon indicates we're continuing to talk about the thing we just talked about. So it kind of makes sense to say her persistent attempts or persistent effort. So we're just kind of looking to see the sentences continuing, and when that happens, there's going to be support happening or repetition. All right. What about number 3 here? Following the principles of community-based research, nations and research are equal partners in health studies. A collaboration blank this model. And we see in the collaboration that the citizens worked alongside scientists. So it sounds like they're working together, and D exemplifies would be a good fit there, which means that it kind of demonstrates. So, all right, let's see. Number 4, the parasitic daughter plant increases its success by flowering at the same time as the host plant it is latched onto. And they determined that the daughter achieves this blank with its host. One thing I've been noticing is the word this indicates something. It's always going to indicate something that we've already talked about. So doing something at the same time, that's synchronization. And we can kind of see, that makes sense. They're doing something together. All right. Number 5, given that conditions in binary star systems should make planetary formation nearly impossible, it's not surprising that the existence of planets in such systems has lacked blank explanation. Straightforward seems pretty good to me here. I was thinking about discernible, but straightforward makes more sense here. And just because I think it's because it's saying it's impossible. So discernible wouldn't work because that would just mean something that you could see. You can discern something or like see it. But we're more so talking that it's more about like not that you can't see it, but it's impossible. All right, number 6. Seminole director blank television's tendency to situate Native American characters in the distant past. This rejection. Okay, again, we have the word this really helping us out. So it would make sense. We already had a rejection. Repudiate means to reject. Cool. All right, let's move on to number 7. In 2007, computer scientist Lewis was working on converted books. He blah, 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 blah. Based on this. Okay, so we're actually into reading comprehension now. I actually have to read this whole thing. So I'm reading it and I'm noticing that he invented those, these, how annoying are these things? The CAPTCHAs, right? You have to actually figure out what it's saying. And he invented it and it helped. So it seems like A is a pretty good choice here, just kind of discussing his invention of CAPTCHA. Cool. All right, that's straightforward to me. 8. This is where, you actually have to pay attention to, well, I don't know. It's fiction. I was going to say you have to pay attention to what's, happening between the lines, but you kind of don't here. Let's just kind of read this. Lily had no real intimacy with nature, but she had a passion for the appropriate and could be keenly sensitive to a scene, which was the fitting background of her own sensations. Now, notice before I even continue reading, we have to get the function of the sentence, which means the connection or the job of the job of the underlined part in relation to what we've already said. What is its role? Why do we say the underlined part? Well, it's going to have a connection to what we've already said. The first sentence, remember, she says she could be sensitive. And then we have this sentence that's underlined. The landscape seemed an enlargement of her present mood, and she found something of herself in its calmness, its breath. So these are good questions to actually predict the answer, because you kind of can tell what the sentence is doing. It's continuing to talk about how she can be sensitive and kind of illustrating that. So that, to me, is a pretty clear-cut D. It illustrates an idea introduced in the previous sentence. So for function of a sentence, look at the sentence that's underlined, but look at what's happening before it. Think about how it sort of connects to that. There always will be a connection because it's next to that sentence. And a lot of times this is what's happening. It's just continuing to talk about the thing in the first sentence. By the way, for number 7, also a good one to kind of predict the answer in your own words first, which I kind of did if you heard me talking about it. It's like just talking about his invention. All right, let's see. Number 9. Study by Madhu suggests that exposure, this is funny to me, exposure to sunshine can lead to overly optimistic behavior. It's like, okay, I don't think that's real. This study is going to be really hard to replicate, but whatever. What are we talking about here in the function of the sentence? Well, it's talking about how they did this study, right? Using data from these dates, they compared the earnings to whatever. That is going to be C, explaining the methodology. Methodology is just the way they did it. Okay, awesome. Number 9, another fiction thing. This is from a novel. Mother didn't hang out with the dull ladies. She wanted to play with the children. She wrote them stories. She made up poetry. Well, that seems pretty obvious that Mother is creating stories and poems for her children. That's really, really straightforward. All right, moving on. Number 11. The following text is from Maggie's poem, Poet of Our Race. She's addressing a Black author. You have told of joy and mirth. You've read the hearts and souls of men. You have read the flowers' language. And the brook liked you. So the guy is kind of at one with nature and people. That's my little summary here. So the main purpose of the text for me, if I'm predicting it, is like it's kind of showing how he's like in tune with people and in tune with nature. And that is A. Whoa, it's not all of them. Oh, darn it. Let's see if I can stop that. All right. A, just A. Don't pick more than one choice. You'll get it wrong. It's just choice A. All right. Because he's perceptive, right? Let's move on to number 12. To You is a poem by Walt Whitman. He suggests that readers whom he addresses directly have not fully understood themselves writing. Okay, so we have to just pick something that shows how the readers are not fully understanding themselves. And A is right. You have not known what you are. All right, that works. You've slumbered upon yourself all your life. Okay, yep. Your eyelids have been the same as closed. Pretty harsh, Walt. However, yeah, it's basically saying you don't understand yourself. All right. So we have to, now we're getting into, I guess the last question was kind of like this too. What would support the claim? That's pretty the same as in real life. This is not, what would support this claim logically. So we're looking for the claim. So let's see here. We're going to figure it out. Chambi is a big deal in Latin American photography. In a paper for a class, the student claims that Chambi's photographs have considerable ethnographic value. In his work, he was able to capture diverse elements of Peruvian society. Okay, cool. And don't worry if you don't know what ethnographic means. I kind of don't really know what that means either. I think it just means like capturing the ethnicity of it somehow. But it's basically saying he's capturing, diverse elements of society and doing it well. And A works for that, right? Chambi took many commissioned portraits of Peruvians, but he also produced a lot of images of indigenous communities. Okay. Yeah, that's diverse. right? Everybody, not just the wealthy, the indigenous as well. Cool. All right, let's move on from that guy. So now let me just make sure I can see this whole thing at once without cutting it off. All right. Now we got to use a table. So one thing I've noticed about this type of question, there's way more information in the table, and there's even way more information in the passage than I need to care about. Like I don't care about this stuff. I just want to figure out the part that helps me get the answer. But I do want to understand like kind of vaguely what the table is about. So I'm going to look at it. It's like, okay, there's an individual, the years they were active, and the number of films they were in. And it's like film output of these people. Don't worry, I have no idea who these people are either. But we're kind of saying that they're indigenous actors and filmmakers. And what I find is that I sort of skim the passage, and I'm not skimming it completely, but I'm not worrying about how much I remember. I'm just kind of like getting the big picture if I can. And what I'm really focused on is the end, because that's where the blank is. And it said, so many films have been lost that the counts of the four figures output should be taken as bare minimums rather than totals. It's entirely possible, for example, that. So basically, we want to say it's more than we think, right? Because we lost a bunch of them. They're not really the totals. And the only one I see that kind of works with that is C. Lillian acted in far more than 66 films. And, see here, it says she was 66 films, but it's basically saying more. And then this Edwin guy directed more than 58. So we're like, okay, it matches the table. It says they did more than the table says. And so again, like, notice we didn't have to pay attention to like most of the information here. We do, however, have to figure out what is the sort of example related to. It's like, okay, it's the numbers are like the low end, not the real. All right, so the answer is C. 15. Okay, let's see if I can do this without cutting myself off here too much. All right, I think we can see that. So again, tons of information here. The last thing we want to do is get bogged down into this, but let's just take a quick look. We want to understand what the data is. So we see it's juvenile plants found growing on bare ground and in patches of vegetation. So we got the species, we got bare ground, we got patches of vegetation. And we can kind of see the trend is that there's more plants in vegetation than bare ground. So these are just things I'm absorbing as I look at it. So it's like we looked at the plot, randomly distributed, only 15 would be with other plants and vegetation. Then they counted stuff. The methodology, like all this stuff, rarely do we care about the methodology. Maybe the question's going to ask about methodology, but a lot of times it doesn't. Really, the thing that I care most about is the conclusion or the claim. What's the claim? They claim that plants that grow in close proximity to other plants gain an advantage. Okay, so I kind of understand what that means. If your plant that's going to be the vegetation ones, the plants found in patches of vegetation. And we can see that there's more. Now, if we go through the choices, the only one that makes sense is D. Because it's saying for each species, the percentage of plants in vegetation was higher than what would be expected if they were randomly distributed. Now, I did have to go back to the passage to figure that out. Only 15%, if they were randomly distributed, would be veg. However, we can see from the table that it's like 60-ish% for most of them. And it's like, okay, that's more. D is right. All right, let's move on. Now we are getting into more sciencey stuff. And again, any kind of like passage with a lot of detail, I'm not super concerned about a lot of the detail. I care mostly about the big picture. In this case, it's a hypothesis. So I peeked at the question first to see that. I'm like, all right, I need to figure out what's the hypothesis. So I read through it. These plants can grow on rock, and the roots kind of grow into the rock with acid, and that creates channels to help them grow. So they, what's their hypothesis? Oh, here it is at the end. Just like usually, they depend on dissolving the rock with acids. Okay, sweet. What would support that? Well, C looks good, right? The roots of these things carve into things when the cracks are not, even when cracks are readily available. And that goes with the thing I underlined in the passage. They depend on the rock because it releases nutrients or something. So even if there is a crack, they do it. That goes with the hypothesis that, they depend on the rocks. Cool. All right, that's logical. What about 17? Dinosaurs. Okay, the dinosaurs are big because of CO2. And here we have our first paradox. If it says logically completes the text right now doesn't make sense. We need a new piece of information. That's what we're looking for to make it make sense. So it's basically saying dinosaurs are big, maybe because of CO2. However, there's no evidence of this CO2. How can this be? That's the paradox. And let's underline it just to make it more clear. These are the two things we're going to have to think about. So massive sizes from CO2, and then we have the other thing. There is no evidence of spikes in CO2 coinciding with this. So that's the paradox. Well, one thing that could explain it is B, right? So B, it's like, hey, that explains it. They didn't need CO2. That's like, okay, cool. That clears it up, So we're basically looking to kind of resolve a situation that doesn't make sense. Just the new information will be logically something that resolves it. All right. Another paradox, because we see the word logically completes. So we say here that judges cite philosophers, and then Anita says, yeah, they are inclined to mention the people who align with their views, but the strongest ones consider and rebut potential objections. Therefore, discussing philosophers whose views conflict could therefore help judges improve their arguments. That makes sense, right? Like if the strongest opinions consider and rebut potential objections, therefore, like using those philosophers is going to help them improve their arguments because they're helping them like respond to potential objections. So B. All right. Moving on. We're finally into the grammar zone. So the rest of the test is going to be grammar. There's a ton of grammar on this test. I mean, I guess it's somewhat proportional, but 19 through 33 all grammar / usage / punctuation. So what are we talking about here? Plastics can be successful. For example, Japan achieved a 40% reduction in plastic bag use after cashiers were instructed to ask customers whether they wanted a bag. All right, that's easy. They. In ancient Greece, an Epicurean was a follower of Epicurus. Pleasure's absence of pain and of trouble. In the blank that all lie. And I don't really know what's going in the blank here. I have to look at the choices. And I guess it's A. And I'm just kind of like doing trial and error with the choices here until I find one that fits. Whoa, slow down, underline. Yeah, it's A, just because really all we need to do is use a comma here. I'm not going to get into the technical reasons for like why we have a comma here, but the other choices are wrong. This is a good time to comment if you like, why is it not B? Just put a comment and I'll respond. But we can kind of talk. I'm not going to bore you by talking about like every punctuation rule at play here. And so let's just move on. 21. British scientists Watson and Crick won the Nobel Prize, but it's misleading to say they discovered it. Their findings were based. So we got to use the right there. We're talking about Watson and Crick, whatever his name is. It's both of them. Their findings. So it's there. All right. Moving on. 22. Anime Wong finally got a starring role, a film that Critic Stina Chin claims this is a time when we don't need commas. Just because there's a name doesn't mean you put commas around it. And this is one of those times. Yeah, no comma needed. All right. Tulips in 1637, some historians claim. I mean, they're currently claiming, present tense claim. I don't know. It's pretty straightforward. Historians are plural, so it's claim, not claims. 24, researchers figured out why some roundworms move in the opposite direction when searching for food in the northern hemisphere. The magnetic. And I'm just kind of reading this to myself. And basically what I'm doing as I read to myself is I'm looking at the choices. And I actually have to slow down here because I was about to screw this up. This is all one sentence. Let me just read this again. Researchers studying this thing have determined why some soil-dwelling roundworms in the southern hemisphere move in the opposite direction of Earth's magnetic field when searching for food, colon. So it's A. One rule of thumb for a colon, the part of the sentence before the colon needs to be a complete sentence. And it is here. If we were to put a period after food, it would work, right? Therefore, a colon works. The part after the colon could kind of be whatever. But good rule of thumb, if you can put a period there, a colon isn't going to be wrong. It might not be the best choice, but it's not going to be wrong. And in this case, the other choices are all wrong. They create problems. So the part after the colon explains the part before the colon, like I mean the entire thing, the entire sentence before the colon has to function as a complete sentence. All right, number 25. Scientists believe that unlike most other species, turtle barnacles can dissolve the thing they use to attach themselves. This has got to be themselves because it's talking about the barnacles. Basic English. Chutes and Ladders is actually Nepalese, apparently. So in both games, they encounter good or bad spaces. Landing on one of the good spaces allows the player. Okay, so landing on one of the good spaces that functions as a singular. I think that's a gerund. So, but this thing allows the player to do it. So that's kind of how we pick allows. All right, 27. In World War II, Grace was recruited, and her subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. And here again, we need our friend the colon, because the part of everything before that is a complete sentence, so colon works. The part after the colon doesn't, we don't have to care what it is, but the part before the colon again has to be a complete sentence. Great. Wonderful. In 1453, King Henry VI got sick, and then this other guy, on recovering 2 years later, the only choice that's going to work here is A. We have an introductory phrase without a subject. Who's recovering 2 years later? The next noun must be the subject of that phrase. Therefore, the only choice is C with Henry as the next noun is choice A. C doesn't count. That's Henry's. D doesn't count because it. So anyway, 29. Novels and poems are distinct, but there's hybrid versions. Bernardine is Emperor's Babe, is a verse novel. Seems like it's an example, right? Yeah, that's definitely like an example of what we're talking about. So it's D. All right, we're almost done, guys. Keep going here. This is kind of cool, like a fun fact. Bulls at 2 weeks can smell but not see or hear. Domesticated dogs can see, hear, and smell. So that's going to be a contrast. So we need a contrast there. By contrast, obviously creates that contrast. 31. Researchers report that while mathematicians may have traditionally worked alone, evidence points to a shift in the opposite direction. Mathematicians are choosing to collaborate. So we notice we have support. Both sentences are kind of saying the same thing. Opposite of working alone, collaborating. So that seems to me like increasingly. And actually, I take it back. The way that I'm getting increasingly, it's not just the connection between the sentences. Yeah, they're supporting each other, but how do we know it's increasingly and not like the other choices? Good question, right? Right, Vince? Explain yourself. Well, I think I get it from here. A rise in the number of things credited to multiple authors. That's saying it's increasing. Wonderful. All right, now we got to deal with these note takers. And usually, all right, I guess you can see that. Trust me, it's number 32. All right, here's the notes. Pterosaurs flew. They looked at the jawbones. What are they, juvenile or adult? We looked with microscopes and said they had few growth lines like a fully grown, therefore it's a juvenile. And how do we present the findings here? Well, it's just going to be kind of a summary of everything, right? We're kind of saying that we analyzed the jawbones to determine they were juvenile. And that's D. Like literally just summarizing. There's no, like, we don't have to think here. It's just like complete summary of the notes. All right, and then 33, our final question. More notes. Again, we have to kind of get the main idea of these notes. African-American women were a big deal in the civil rights movement. Anna was the advisor. Bates was a journalist. Anna worked behind the scenes. Bates actually spoke. Okay, well, it sounds, we just have to kind of compare their contributions. And again, it's sort of the main idea of what we just read. And A doesn't work because it's only talking about what Bates did. Whereas C is right because it's talking about what Hedgeman did and also what Bates did. All right, so there you have it, people. This video is going to come to an end, but comment if you don't understand any one of these questions or explanations, or if you're like, why is it not C? You know, that's a good use of your time. Do that. It'll make you better at the test to discuss the test. But anyway, good luck with the rest of your SAT prep. See you next time.